Hello, everybody. Hi. Wait. Hey, everybody. Okay. Pretty darn good. Who am I? This is my favorite unit command. Hi, I'm Brock, or awwaiid on the internets. My slide software will show what command I'm going to run at the bottom here. So as a demonstration, who am I? awwaiid. See, it's profound. It's deep. I'm sure you've all seen that before. Okay, rather than start at the beginning, I'm going to start in the middle, work my way to the beginning, and then we'll go to the end. First, a demo. This is the same one you'll get on the AngularJS website. There's a little hello thing and that, and you can say hello world, and it just, whatever I put in here shows up there. Seems kind of fancy. Imagine if you wanted to write all the JavaScript necessary for that. Let's look at it. So this is the entire application you just saw. Pull in AngularJS, that's boring. The first interesting thing here at the top is this ng-app. That tells Angular that we are having an Angular app. It's crazy. Down here is the actual functional part. We have two things. We have an input, which has a special attribute, ng-model, tied to something called username. And then we have a couple curlies, a little templatey thing looking here that is also labeled as username. Perhaps that's how these are tied together. Actually, it is how these are tied together. Let me talk about these a little bit more. Oops. No. So Angular has something called directives, which customize HTML. In this case, they're adding an attribute that you can put anywhere you want. You can put it on div tags or whatever, that tell Angular, start looking from here and in nested scopes for things that you care about. So kind of lexical. The other part of this is very simple. We have an input, and it tells us about the username. They talk a lot about something called two-way binding. And this is an example of that. We've decided that input is going to be bound to username in their model, and this reads from username. So neither of these things are the model. They're just bound to the model. If something else were to change the model, both of these get updated, and we'll see several examples of that in just a minute. So we've seen template and a little bit of directives. Now let's take a step back. No, sorry. Step forward. No, that's not right. Step back, then forward, and then back. Now we're cha-chaing. Thank you. I want to talk about scope. Oh, I didn't even actually look at that slide. Yeah, the philosophy behind Angular is, in some ways, they're building a framework like all the others, but the core philosophy is they want to pretend that HTML and the browser are extended in a way, or maybe some of their changes they would actually like to be included in browsers. AngularJS is sponsored by Google, so they happen to have a browser. I wouldn't be surprised if some of this actually does end up in a browser, especially some of the event loop things we'll see in a little bit. But that's the kind of guiding philosophy behind it. It wants to be declarative like HTML for some things, and imperative like JavaScript, using JavaScript for some others. One of the most important concepts in AngularJS is this thing called scope. Now you see it has a dollar there. That's only to indicate that this is special for Angular. It's sort of a namespace, completely unlike our dollars, of course. A little bit more like the jQuery dollar usage. But anyway, they throw that on top of something, and you know it's provided by Angular. It's a system thing. Scope is going to tie or kind of bind into a piece of the DOM and instances of controllers. This is kind of like function scope in a lot of ways, which is pretty neat. Let's look again at this. So this particular app actually is just using something called root scope. So there's no particular narrowed down scope. It's just one wide scope for everything. However, I talked about that already. Okay. However, if you want, you can actually set up a controller, and a controller has a scope. It kind of binds one-to-one. So an instance of a controller is an instance of the scope. Controllers are just functions, very straightforward things. So this is a very simple controller. Doesn't do anything, but we can make it do a little bit more. So in this example, what we're doing is we're saying this simple controller gets its own scope. I'll talk about this parameter passing more in a bit. Gets its own scope, and it says add to that scope username equals Joe. This is then declared inside of this div tag to say within the scope of this, sorry, two uses the word scope, within the range of this div, we're going to use this controller. And implicitly, that will actually execute the subroutine and set up the scope. We'll see other things you can do in here in just a minute. So let's try that. Surprise, surprise, it actually initializes it to Joe. Now we can edit it and it behaves exactly like before. But we've initialized it here. So we could take this further. Let's say, do this. Let's say we have a, let's say we have a single controller, simple controller A, and we're going to nest it inside of itself. You follow? So we have the outside div, simple controller A, then we have an embedded div, simple controller A, and they both refer to username, and they're labeled the same. So we can run this, and when we type in here, it fills out everywhere. Why? Why does it fill out everywhere, you say? Because you're all on the edges of your seats, I can see. They're nested, and if you don't explicitly define a variable whenever you initialize it, then it just inherits it from the outer scope. So it's kind of like the first usage is whenever you are lexically assigning it to your scope. Which is why I have this commented out code where I say, okay, what happens if we, oh no, actually I've got a better idea. Watch this. It's going to be awesome. So we type in here, right? But let's say we type in here. Now we've explicitly defined this version of username inside of this scope and effectively stopped inheriting it, or I don't know if that's a good word, but you know what I mean. Stopped using the one from our parent container. Now they're completely independent. And you can see that whenever we comment out this default version, because they just start off independent immediately. Even if I modify this one, they're already independent because it's already been defined for each one of them. See what I'm saying? Okay. So that's pretty fun. What else we got? Okay, now I'm going to do something even trickier, but just to really get this in, because this is a core concept that is powerful, and I like it a lot. Here, we're going to have simple controller A, and we're going to have set it up with a default username. We'll have simple controller B, which we don't do anything in. We're going to nest B inside of A, and just for variety's sake, we're going to nest A inside of B. So we nested, A is the one where it defines it, and as expected, whenever we modify it here, B, even though it's a completely different controller, is still getting the same scope. Same deal as before, where we override this, and now they are independent. Here, we embedded them opposite. So this is simple controller A, and this is simple controller B. A initialized Joe, and as expected, they're actually independent from the beginning, because the inner one actually is already defined. Oops. All right. Let us then step back a second again. There's a bunch of concepts in AngularJS. I'm not going to be able to touch upon all of them. The idea that I have here, I'm introducing my talk in the middle in case you missed it. The idea I have here is to just show you some interesting things that are not obvious from the tutorials. Then, when you go back home and you're like, that was weird, I want to see what this is really about, and you do the tutorials, you'll actually already have a toehold of some of the deeper gems of what's going on. We've seen templates, that's just HTML turned into DOM. We've seen model. It's a little bit weird to say the scope is the model, but it is. The way they explain it in their documents is that scope refers to the model, but conceptually that isn't quite accurate. What's really happening is that scope is the model. You can point it at other stuff outside of scope, and then it's all linked nonetheless. And oddly, you have one scope per instance of a controller, as we saw, and they can nest and override each other. Controllers you've seen, those are just functions. They have a concept called modules, where you can put together a bunch of these things into a namespace. They have a concept called services, which are good for tying to external things. I used it for implementing Ajax-y service to my web server for an API. Then you have directives, which we'll talk about in a minute. Possibly the most powerful thing in AngularJS, which we don't have time to go into. And we have watchers, which are things that actively watch the state of models and can execute events based on it. The templates actively watch it. They effectively are a watcher, but sometimes you want to actually do things whenever things in your model change. Filters are mainly for formatting, and then we'll talk about dependency injection in a second. So controllers so far haven't done anything. Let's make ours do something. So here we have simpleController A. It's big enough, yes. It's given its scope, sets up username, and now it's adding a little bit of functionality. It's going to give a method called capitalize, where it takes whatever the current username and uppercases it. And then the rest here is the same, except we're going to add a button that invokes this. You notice it doesn't say anything about scope here, it just knows what scope it's currently in. So kind of as expected, whenever you click this, it uppercases it. But notice it's uppercasing everything. The input is watching the scope for it. The thing in the H2, the curly braces, is watching the scope. Everything is watching it, which sounds kind of scary. So, oops, wait, let's talk about watches. Oh, let's make it even crazier, I guess. I wonder what this is. Oh, great. Okay, so just to introduce the idea of watches, we're going to take what we just had and we're going to add in a watch. So on the scope, you're attaching a watch. You're going to watch username, and anytime username is invoked, it's going to hit this function called new, or anytime username is changed, it's going to invoke this function which gives it the new username. It also gives it the old username, but we don't care. And then it's going to update this other scope variable called greetings, and maybe it's going to count how many uppercase letters it has. And here I've just added some template things. So let's see if it actually works, shall we? I don't know who Joe is, but they're awesome. So it has three. Hey, Joe. So we have this one, which is forcing everything to lowercase. This is just exactly what I typed. And this is a count of the capitals. Now, the count of the capitals, as you may recall, is backgrounded, so you can't see it. I'll show you in a second, is actually built on a watch. Actually, both of these are. So if we say this is big, that was our callback. And it doesn't do anything except for update that same binding inside of scope. But instantaneously, the watch picks up on that and recalculates everything. So you can see that right there. It's just counting how many uppercase letters it has and telling you the length. And surprisingly, it's fast, and the theory goes that you can get a whole bunch of these, and it will still be very efficient. How, you may say? How does any of this work, you may say? All right, I'm going to show you the diagrams from their thing. Let's see how fuzzy they're. Ah, not too bad. When you first start up your application, your browser loads some HTML, turns into DOM content loaded event happens, and that's when AngularJS starts picking things up. It looks for the ng app, It sets up the dependency injection stuff, which I'll talk about. The compile is basically translating those curlies and other things into just pure DOM and setting up the root scope, and then it actually updates what you see in your browser. That part's whatever, but the fun part is this. So when you have an event happen in the actual browser, AngularJS watches for events like key presses, things like that, anything that it knows that you're looking for. And it actually has its own entire event queue. So it will, let's say that watch where I'm doing the uppercase. The uppercase actually modifies the scope. So in here, it'll modify the scope. In here, it will look through all of the things to see what touched what, and it says, oh, username is modified. And then it'll go back here and say, does anyone care about username being modified? And it'll keep doing that until everything settles. Once everything settles, it will then go back and go ahead and do all of the rendering and updating of the templates. So it makes it really efficient. You can, if you wanted to, pretty easily abuse this. It'll go through, I think, 30 times before it starts getting mad at you. So if you have something that isn't actually predictable, then it will break. But for the most part, you do things like this, and it settles within maybe an iteration or two, and then it renders. It's pretty fancy. Okay, I don't have that much time, so I want to tell you about a couple cool things in here, one of which is dependency injection. In my controllers, you saw that I used this thing called scope. In fact, actually, one of my earlier controllers, I didn't use anything. This is a dependency. The reason it wants to pass in scope rather than you just getting it magically is so that you can mock things. You can actually set up a scope and pass it into your controller and see what you get out. There's other things. There's other services that Angular provides or ones that you can write yourself, such as this HTTP. When you read the docs, it doesn't say anything about where you're supposed to put these, and you could put HTTP, there's some, I don't know, some cookie services, other things, and you just put them in there, and I'm like, that can't work. You can't just put random things in there. And you can change the order. The order doesn't matter, and that can't work. However, what's really happening is it's taking your function and translating it into something like this, where it has your module, which my example doesn't show very well, your controller, and it extracts out what your dependencies are, what your parameters are, and then it calls your function, and it knows after that positionally what they are. How, you may say? Have you ever done toString on a function, JavaScript? Anyone? Let's do it. I got 2 minutes. Where do I want to go? Oh, localhost? All right, let's do that. All right. So let's say we write a function. Function foo. Hi, this is a something like that. What? That's a very bad idea. Okay, you can do foo.toString, and guess what it gives? The source code for your function. This is why I like JavaScript. It's a little bit evil. AngularJS then parses your function, pulls out the parameters, and uses that to construct their full way of doing this. Nice, yes, that's my kind of evil, I'd say. Now, of course, this doesn't always work so well if you try to minify your scripts or things like that. You know, there are special minification tools because when you minify, it'll change these to like A and B or things. But there's special tools that will minify things correctly. I mentioned services before. HTTP, you can make your own. Resource is a good one. It expects JSON. I can try to show you my example real quick, though I'm out of time. The powerful thing, the thing that I need to get further into, but not good for introductory anyway, is custom directives. In order to manipulate the DOM, you don't do it in your controller. That's very frowned upon. The idea is controllers should be completely unit testable without an actual DOM. Instead, you make these custom directives and you concentrate all that evil into them, the Matt Trout quote thing. And that's where you would wrap around like your jQuery date widget or something like that. And then in your HTML, you just have a new tag called date widget. And that knows how to work with your scope as far as injecting what variables you want. It can work with services, all kinds of things. One really cool thing is a debugger in Chrome called Batarang, like the Batarang. And it will actually render the scopes and visualize everything for you and where everything is. And here are some resources. And I'm unfortunately out of time. But I have other stuff to show you if you want to come and get me afterwards. This is very fun. There are a lot of really cool MVCs out there, and this is one of the weird ones, I think, which I enjoy. One question? Anyone? One. You.
Debugging.
Yes.
What methods do you like to use to try to be able to debug and look into any of these things?
So the Batarang module goes into the Chrome's own debugger tools, so you can do stepping and stuff like that, but more importantly, it'll give you a visualization on the nested scopes and what you currently have. So that's one. I often just do console.log. That's pretty easy. But probably the biggest one is that this is all designed to be unit testable. So actually writing a test suite that can execute a controller, pass it in a fake HTTP service, and see what it tries to invoke. And you can actually see how it's hitting your server. So those are the main ways. All right, one more.
Can you assign multiple modules to an element? In all your cases, you had like simple test A was defined as one, and then on another element, another. Can you put two on the same element?
I have no idea. You want to try? I don't know if we have time because someone's supposed to talk after me. Really? All right, we got time. Other people, you can actually, we'll just say this is the end, and then you can leave, and we'll do this experiment. Thank you. Do 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 do. I don't think this will work.
Maybe you should try with colors.
Comma?
Yeah, like or
Maybe some quotes? Maybe a space? Did I misspell anything? It all looks generally okay. Called
You need to add another NG model to your template.
Oh, sure. No, I shouldn't. It should just display, It should display, yeah, right. So, no. I think that's the answer. Yeah, so you would maybe nest, you'd have a div and a div instead, and if one of them only knew about its own scope variables and the other only knew about its own scope variables, everything's okay. Cool. All right. Thank you.